Hello, and welcome to myfinanceteacher.org. Welcome to our January uranium report. And as it's the beginning of 2023, in addition to looking at some of the recent developments in the nuclear industry, let's also have a look at a recap of 2022 and see if what happened last year suggests that uranium is still promising, say, over the next 2 to 5 to 10 years. So for the recap of 2022, let's start in January 2022 with the unrests in Kazakhstan. By the way, Kazakhstan as a country is the largest uranium producer in the world. So clearly unrest in that largest uranium producer in the world does spark some concerns about the security of uranium supply generally. Not only back in the beginning of 2022, but generally in the future as well, regarding a possibility of any kind of disruptions in the future in some other uranium producing countries of the world. And as to how promising it is for uranium, that will likely induce the Western nations to invest that much more into local uranium producers. We see some examples of that in the US, and more examples will be discussed in future videos. After that, in February 2022, we saw the beginning of Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, as a result of that, Russia has justifiably been sanctioned in a lot of areas by the Western nations. But interestingly enough, the ongoing uranium nuclear-related contracts with Russia are still not sanctioned as of the moment, but no new contracts with Russian producers or Russian enrichers are, of course, being signed anymore. That again might be interesting to investors into Western service providers, as Russia accounts for 40% of the global enrichment and conversion capacity. And as demand shifts away from east to the west, that might be interesting for longer-term investors. And additionally, Russian invasion of Ukraine also affected Kazakhstan over here, as it has been trying to avoid supplying uranium through Russian routes. And there were temporarily some difficulties with alternative routes for Kazakhstan, and that also sparked some supply concerns, at least temporarily. So with all of that at the beginning of last year, while changes in uranium prices were relatively modest in January to February, the prices did shoot up significantly into March, April, and May. Perhaps as a result of these developments, or perhaps as a result of natural market sentiment cycles. By the way, we do talk about those asset price cycles with the members at myfinanceteacher.org. So make sure to join us for regular updates. Moving on to closer to the middle of the year, we come to the energy crisis all over Europe, where electricity prices have shot up by a factor of 10, no less. And a couple of interesting remarks here is that last year Germany consumed the most coal ever, or about 13% more than back in 2021. Having spent billions and billions, in fact $500 billion, into renewable energy over the years, back in 2022 Germany had to import wood from the US as this energy crisis was unfolding. And of course, as I mentioned in a recent, that's perhaps December uranium report, this energy crisis made the politicians realize that nuclear is the way to go into the future. Very bullish development in the longer term. After that, we saw the Inflation Reduction Act by the US. That was really interesting, as that grants some tax credits to nuclear power generators back in the US. It also gives them life extension on those nuclear power plants. All of that gives more confidence to those utilities, nuclear-based electric generators, to start signing more of those longer-term contracts for uranium supplies. And by the way, talking about those long-term contracts, 2022 last year was the first in 10 to 11 years after the Fukushima disaster when the amount of uranium supplied within those long-term contracts exceeded 100 million pounds. In fact, for 2022, we see 114 million pounds supplied under those long-term contracts. But interestingly enough, even that amount is still below the amounts of uranium that the reactors need. Hence, the inventories that they still have is still going down. So while the inventories held by utilities, they might prevent the uranium prices to appreciate significantly at the moment, the drawdowns in these inventories going through over the last couple of years are again a bullish development in the longer term over the next few years. Another very interesting development that we talked about, if I am not mistaken, in our May 2022 uranium report, was a switch from underfeeding to overfeeding in uranium enrichment. For more details on that, make sure to watch that May 2022 uranium report again. But basically what happened is that with Russia, as I already mentioned, controlling over 40% of global enrichment capacity, the demand for enrichment has increased substantially everywhere else in the world. And that means that to cope with additional demand, the enrichers have to stuff more uranium into the enrichment facilities. That's called overfeeding, in order to speed up this enrichment process. Again, for more details on how the tech works, look back at our May report. That has actually destroyed some of the supply of uranium that was sourced from underfeeding those enrichment facilities, and at the same time increased demand, again due to overfeeding these enrichment facilities. And while enrichment is downstream in the nuclear supply chain, that lower stream part of this chain has already seen some price appreciation. Let's have a look at these prices. The process chain in uranium, again, that uranium has to be converted first, then enriched before it's supplied to the power generators. And we see through the mid to late last year, both conversion and enrichment prices have increased substantially. We see conversion price rise from just over 15 to around 40. That's nearly tripling of the conversion prices. And the enrichment price has increased from under 60 to over 120. That's more than doubling of the enrichment price. So the prices downstream in the nuclear industry have already doubled and tripled. And it's only a matter of time for these price changes, price appreciations, to shift upstream, that is, to the uranium price itself. By the way, recently I discussed these uranium price cycles. That's in the first half of January. You might want to have a look at that video for an update on uranium price cycles. Moving on, usually in our uranium reports, we also look at what's happening with the physical uranium trusts, such as Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, or ANU in Kazakhstan, and Yellow Cake in the UK. But since December, there weren't any changes with those, so there's nothing to report. So perhaps our next February update might have some interesting news, and I'll keep that February report exclusive for the members at myfinanceteacher.org. So make sure to join us for regular updates, and it's only $10 a month, which is basically nothing in the current inflationary environment. Next, let's have a look at some of the most interesting developments over the last month or so, starting with the US, where the US wants to build a strategic uranium reserve. How amazing is that? At the beginning, the amounts aren't that huge. It's only about $75 million or so allocated to this strategic uranium reserve at the moment. But I'm sure that over the years, there'll be significantly larger investments, perhaps, flowing into this strategic uranium reserve, again, adding that much pressure on the margin for uranium, perhaps pushing the prices significantly higher. Another interesting development is the first SMR small modular reactor certificate given in the US to NuScale. That will allow local US generators, local US utilities to apply for construction of those small modular reactors, SMRs, that much easier. Again, perhaps pushing demand for uranium that much higher over the years, as it takes quite a few years to build those facilities. Moving on eastwards to Europe, in France, we see that they've been coping with their power generators outages, and for the first time in 9 months, the electricity produced from nuclear generators has increased above 40 gigawatts. So if France gets its act together in terms of properly maintaining those nuclear generators, perhaps that would also add to demand for uranium throughout 2023. Another really interesting development in Europe is that the UK is planning to spend 50 to 75 million pounds, perhaps closer to $80 million or so, as part of a larger nuclear fuel investment package, by the way, to spend that amount on uranium conversion. Again, as I mentioned, that's due to the fact that Russia accounts for quite a large percentage of enrichment and conversion capacities. So both France and UK keep pushing for development of their nuclear industry, and of course that is also bullish for investors into nuclear producers. By the way, we do hold some such investments with the members at myfinanceteacher.org. Join us for more details. Moving on further eastward, China keeps pushing forward with their SMR, small modular reactors, where their pressurized water reactors were perhaps the first ones to pass the review of the International Atomic Agency. And this APC 100 in Hainan province is now nearing completion. The equipment is being installed into the facilities at the moment. Another very important development in China that I have already actually mentioned in perhaps the previous uranium report, but I think it's worth repeating as it's a big deal in my opinion, similar to the US, but perhaps on a much larger scale. China is also planning to build its so-called strategic uranium reserve, or the uranium hub as they're gonna call it, somewhere close to the border with Kazakhstan, stockpiling 13,000 tons of uranium as it's planned for this year and up to 23,000 tons into 2026. That's quite a lot. That's equal to the annual uranium production of all of Kazakhstan, which is, again, the largest uranium producing country in the world. So if that goes according to plan over the next few years into 2026, that's clearly going to push demand for uranium significantly higher. And to conclude from developments in the East, India is planning to add 20 to 30 gigawatts of additional nuclear capacity by 2040. So India is not backing down and they're pushing that much further into nuclear industry development as well. And same is going on in Japan, where since the Fukushima disaster, when they closed, say, around 30 reactors or so, they have already reopened 10 of them in about 10 years. And the plans are to reopen another 6 into summer of 2023. So that's a significant increase in the speed of reopening these reactors. Additional 6 reactors in around half a year's time versus 10 reactors over the last 10 years. So if these expectations from Japan go according to plan, that might do wonders for uranium producers. And finishing up with South Korea, where their first unit at Shinhanul begins commercial electricity generation. So that's pretty interesting, and it's the first at this facility, which is expected to have 4 units in total, with the second unit starting its commercial electricity generation in September this year, so that'll be quite interesting, and the other 2 sometime into 2025. Again, in the longer term, perhaps over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, uranium does seem to be very, very promising. But what do I know? I'm not a nuclear engineer, I'm not an expert in the industry, so let me know down in the comments, what do you think of nuclear power into the future, perhaps over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years? Before starting the comments though, make sure to like the video and share it with your friends. Have a nice day, bye bye.